Good morning and welcome to another edition of the Daily Fix. I am your usual host and presenter, Advocate Tudohoyane. In the last episode, we are looking at those differences between police officers, which led to the two dockets that we now have. Now, let us look at the people behind Docket 375. But before we do that, let us look at Docket 636. Docket 636 was then opened at the Fusuras police station soon after Senzo Meyiwa was shot and killed. But it was at that point that problems started to emerge between investigators as to the version of what really happened in that house on that day. So we had Colonel Joyce Buthelezi and Warrant Officer Maku on the one hand, who were saying there were no intruders into that house. And we had Gininda and others like Sibia who were pushing the narrative that there had been intruders into that house. It would appear that shortly thereafter, Colonel Joyce Buthelezi resigned from a committee that had been established to oversee the investigation. This was after Colonel Joyce Buthelezi had made a recommendation that the people in the house ought to be charged with the killing of Senzo Meyiwa and also to be charged with the crime of defeating the ends of justice. So the position that Colonel Joyce Buthelezi took as a very senior member of the South African Police Services, who was part of that investigation, was clearly in accordance with the theory that there had been no intruders into that house. That this story that there had been intruders into that house was simply a fabrication intended to divert the investigation away from the people in the house. So after Colonel Joyce Buthelezi had made that recommendation was rejected. The reasons why it was rejected are not clear. But the bottom line is that her recommendation was rejected. And that was the reason why she resigned from or withdrew from the investigation team. In other words, thereafter, Joyce Buthelezi would have nothing to do with the investigation. This is why we don't see her featuring anywhere in this trial. So it was then left to those like Warrant Officer Makubu, who were still of the view, like Buthelezi, that there'd be no intruders into that house, to pursue that investigation. And that investigation was pursued by Makubu and some of his colleagues relentlessly up until 2019, when Docket 375 was opened. But because there were a lot of differences, those who were pushing the narrative of 375 did so under very difficult circumstances. Because the conventional view was now that there had been intruders into that house. So Maku and his colleagues, to pursue the narrative that there had been no intruders, was a very difficult task. But they went ahead with that investigation, nevertheless. Now, yesterday I also indicated that Docket 375 does not only charge the people in the house, one, with being involved in the killing of Senzo Meyiwa, at least one of them. Two, with defeating the ends of justice by tampering with the scene. That is what 375 is all about. But it would also appear that Docket 375 was also intended to charge the very people who were pushing the narrative of 636. You'll also recall how under cross-examination by Advocate Mshololo, Tumelo Matlala was at pains to call Colonel Joyce Buthelezi a liar. Tumelo Matlala, strenuously told the court that Colonel Joyce Buthelezi was a liar and she had caused all this confusion leading up to the two dockets. This was when he was under re-examination by Advocate Baloyi for the prosecution. In other words, Baloyi wanted to make sure that Tumelo Matlala sort of clears up the air to say, all the things about Colonel Joyce Buthelezi were just lies intended to confuse. Now, we have it on record now that serious differences existed between the police. Joyce Buthelezi and Makubu were never convinced that there were no intruders into that house, and that 636 was simply designed to defeat the ends of justice. Kinindem himself has considered that it related to the crime of defeating the ends of justice, but only fails to tell us who it was that was defeating the ends of justice. So that is the second most important person who is involved with Docket 375, Joyce Buthelezi. You don't see her feature anywhere now in the Senzo Meyiwa trial, because like Docket 375, she's no longer part of these proceedings, because she simply said she will have nothing to do with anything that says there were intruders into that house. This now sort of brings me to the close of this issue around the two dockets. It is clear that there were two theories and the police never came to an agreement about which theory should prevail, one over the other, at least based on the evidence. So those who ended up pushing 636 simply used their power to prevail over those who came up with 375. That is why, although 375 is a later docket, it was simply abandoned when preparations were made for the current trial that is unfolding in the Pretoria High Court. So the Senzo Meyiwa trial will forever be haunted by the existence of two dockets. It remains to be seen where docket 375 is. It will not be easy to access docket 375 because there is a concerted effort on the part of those who are pushing 636 to make sure that docket 375 never surfaces. But it will be found. It will be found. And we now know what its contents were all about anyway. We now realize why everybody that has been associated with 375 has found themselves in trouble. Now, Kubu, for instance, the person who opened Docket 375, has had threats over his life. He has been threatened with death. His house has been broken into. As for Joyce Buthelezi, we don't know much, but she is conspicuously silent. She is conspicuously silent because she just washed her hands off the whole thing. So this is the Senzo Meyiwa investigation. Policemen charging policemen, policemen fighting and failing to come to an agreement. But you see, what I want to take up in the next episode is, where was top police management in all this? Where was top police management in all this? Especially, for instance, the commissioner of police in Gauteng. Where were they as all this was unfolding? So in the next episode, I'll be looking at that aspect. Having said that, let me thank you for all the views that I'm seeing and all the subscriptions that I'm seeing. Please don't skip those adverts. They keep us going. They keep the home fires burning. Thank you very much and have a nice day.